A very good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Singapore International Cyber Week, the International IoT Security Roundtable Technical Panel 2022. I also do want to extend a very big hello to our virtual audiences who are joining us from all over the world. My name is Juliana Yao, and it is my privilege to be your host for today. The theme for this year's technical panel is cybersecurity labeling for medical devices, the opportunities and challenges. So, this year's technical panel aims to discuss principles and practices which government and industry can align on to build trust in ensuring secured medical devices. Would CLS be considered to foster common efforts and a common need? How can the public and private sectors collaborate to increase security of our medical devices? These might be some of the questions that we'll be tackling today. So, in a couple of moments, we will have distinguished speakers and panelists who will discuss the future of CLS and medical devices, avenues of cooperation and innovation. But right now, it gives me great pleasure to invite the Associate Professor Dr. Raymond Chua, Deputy Director of Medical Services, Health Regulation Group and Assistant Commissioner Cybersecurity Healthcare at the Ministry of Health, to deliver his opening remarks. Dr. Raymond Chua, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and I'm glad to see so many of you here attending the session today. Actually, first of all, I would also like to thank ICW for inviting me to give the opening, address on the CLSMD. I think before I start to actually give you what's CLSMD about, let me just give you a opening kind of context to this itself. I think I've actually titled it Securing Connected Medical Devices, and we call it a small piece in a big puzzle, because actually, if you know, the whole connectivity of the whole healthcare ecosystem is actually a big puzzle itself. And actually, medical devices, the OT, is just one part of which is the small piece within this whole ecosystem. And this is where you can see from this picture here. And you start by looking at this top right-hand corner here, which is like a kind of a healthcare facility. And this healthcare facility here is actually connected, to many devices, many systems itself. And imagine that you have a connected medical devices that is like a blood pressure machine that you use, by the healthcare provider, trying to connect and understand what the blood pressure, and monitor the blood pressure of a patient is all about. And increasingly, we can see a lot of these devices that's connecting, the vital signs monitoring to nursing stations, so that actually caregivers do not need to walk to every bed, or the nurses do not need to go to every bed to actually record the vital signs, but you actually get a real-time monitoring of it. And patients or even people with no apparent illness are also starting to increasingly use connected medical devices to track all their health parameters. And as telemedicine has become more mainstream, I think especially with COVID-19, over the past 2 years, it has become more prevalent in terms of the use of telemedicine, teleconnected devices. And I think these readings would then be sent, to our healthcare providers remotely. And then the healthcare providers will then actually triage the patients themselves. So you can see with this interconnectivity of the devices, with the networks, with the healthcare providers, it comes actually at a time where there's a lot of risk, that a lot of patients, providers are very afraid of in terms of data cybersecurity concerns. And I think this is where, we want to see actually, what the burning platform is. And is there really a burning platform? I think this is something, well, I would say that there is, in which increasingly, particularly so in Singapore, after the SingHealth cyber attack in 2018, there's actually been a lot of rising awareness, in terms of how cybersecurity is being tackled, especially at the healthcare sector. And besides just, the the Singapore cyber attack, there has been also small attacks that has been appearing at the private healthcare clinics itself, and there has been reports of that. And I think this is something that we are trying to see how we can address this burning platform. So I think, you can see that with this increasing connectivityness of the medical devices with us, while on one hand, you can see that it has actually revolutionized a lot of how we actually deliver care. And I think COVID itself has also shown that, because with this, you get real-time monitoring, you get better disease monitoring of the vital signs, you get surveillance of the medical conditions. You actually know, and the medical providers actually know when to intervene much earlier, and much quicker in terms of the patients' monitoring and patients' clinical management. And I think this is where, if you can intervene earlier, it actually does result in better health outcomes, as well as hopefully better, lower costs for the patient itself. But with all this, then comes the other side of how do you then look at patient data privacy, what the cyber security concerns are. And I think, as we grow, in this space, I think this is where we are saying that it's actually, and if you read the part in red, we actually did say it is a matter of when and not if that a cyber security incident will happen. We have happened in the system space, but I think this is where we are keeping our fingers crossed, but it is really a matter of when, but not if. So I think this is where I think it is very important that we start to address this proactively, so that we can actually address this whole issue, so that when an incident should really happen, I think we are all prepared and we know how to tackle it. So you can see down here, and there are major movements actually in the international scene over the past few years. Yeah, and you can see from the right-hand side how some of the medical device regulators have been responding. You can see that the product recalls on the left-hand side is actually getting increasingly common. You can see quite a lot of industries over the past few years, even pre-COVID, different pumps, insulin pumps is one, pacemakers, blood glucose monitors, ultrasound systems, all these things are starting to get attacked and hacked. And I think, you can see this is really like a tug of war, between how, the hackers attack, the devices, and how the regulators then respond in terms of, how do you manage to prevent such an attack from widening. And I think this is where, we are seeing the different scenarios play out over the past few years. And this is actually not dissimilar to actually how a lot of the IT companies like PCs, Macs, have been providing regular updates and patches to see how to tackle some of these conditions. So I think, this is just paints probably the outline of, why we then decided to move towards looking at CRS-MD. And even before I reach the point of CRS-MD, I just also want to say that with that context of increasing connectivity, we have then decided to actually form what we call a medical device oversight committee within the Ministry of Health, and we roped in, many different players and agencies, from CSA, looks at cybersecurity regulators, to HSA, which looks at medical device regulator, and then we've also integrated health information systems, the IHIS, which is our health tech agency, which looks at a lot of our health tech systems itself. I think this is where we get different partners, to come in to actually form this medical device oversight committee, which we adopted a total life cycle approach to it. And what do I mean by a total life cycle approach? You can see, if you go on a clockwise direction from one, we actually looked at it from a development, upstream, even before it gets regulated by HSA. How do you actually get the manufacturers in to look at development, manufacturing, as well as the registration itself? Once you have actually manufactured, you actually then need to work with the regulators to bring in the devices for registration. I think this is where we then involved HSA as part and parcel of our committee. Then after the device is being registered, I think it's very important to then look at it from the point that the registered devices then come in to be procured by use of our healthcare institutions. And that's where procurement comes in, and we got the BME departments to come in to also be part and parcel of the health within this oversight committee itself. Because I think it's very important for them to be involved, to understand when they procure, it's not just about the clinical efficacy, the safety of the devices, it is also about understanding what the cybersecurity requirements are. After that, I think once it's procured, it's then being used by our clinicians within the healthcare institutions across both public and private sector. And I think this is where you'd see number 3, which we actually got the clinicians in. So we got the CMIOs in to actually be part of the committee to actually see when they look at clinical use of the devices, how do they then look at the cybersecurity requirements? How do they monitor the cybersecurity usage? If there's any risk, how do they monitor and track, such that they can actually flag out, to the institution as early as possible. And then after that, I think it's very important to then get, while it is being used, how do you detect, how do you actually pick up any incidents, and how do you then manage any threats itself if something should happen. And I think this is what we call the whole life cycle approach that we have adopted for the Medical Device Oversight Committee. And upstream then, as part and parcel of the first part where we are looking at the development, the manufacturing and registration, one of the things that we have started working on is then in line with what CSA has been working on in terms of the CRS scheme itself, we thought maybe that could be very good to be extended beyond just consumer and itself, where CRS and CSA has been working on, to now look at medical devices. And this is conceptualized, together with a whole group of critical stakeholders within the Medical Device Oversight Committee, where we have talked about from MOH ourselves, we have gotten CSA in for the cybersecurity, we have gotten the product regulators in, which is HSA, as well as our health tech industry in from IHIS. And I think we want to actually, see how we can determine the standards that the connected medical devices must achieve in this CRS-MD scheme. I think it is very important to ensure that the final product is then harmonized with existing policies that's being used by our agencies, and see how we can take a much more structured approach to upgrading and uplifting the cybersecurity standards for the medical devices to be used within the healthcare ecosystem. I think other than determining the standards, I think it is very important to then also determine what are the type of devices that we want to put under this scheme itself. And then, if we try to put everything under one basket, it is also going to be challenging to implement everything together. So I think we also look at what the timeline are in terms of the implementation of the standards. So all in all, I think what we want is twofold. We want to uplift the manufacturing standards when they look at cybersecurity. And number 2 is how to uplift the consumer awareness of this CRS-MD, such that, when they purchase any devices, they will actually know, what is the cybersecurity standards of the medical devices that they are purchasing, either at the clinician end or at the consumer end. I think we looked at this CRS-MD, and there's actually 7 components here. From looking at the framework, and we have defined it in 4 different layers, which I will talk about later. And then we are looking at the label design, whether it's going to be something that's electronic or physical. Because some of the medical devices may not be big. You're talking about pacemaker, is going to be very small. And how do you actually affix a label on it? I think this is where we are saying maybe, physical labels may not be something that is feasible. And do we look at it from electronic labeling? Do we look at it from a QR code? Or do we just put it on a kind of listing of where the devices for the CRS-MD should be found? So that the manufacturers, the consumers will be aware of them. Then actually, how do we look at, operationalizing it? How do we get people, the processes and the systems to roll this out? Then how do we continually review this certification system? How do we handle some of the legacy devices? Because not all the devices have been certified. All the old devices have not been. How do we actually look at this? How do we look at the governance of this within the institution itself? And then how do we actually then move on once we have rolled this out locally? I think it's very important to also look at mutual recognition. Because one of the things is if we have something that is actually possibly the first in the world to roll this out, then I think it's very important that we get some mutual recognition, such that when our local industry should launch some of these overseas, I think that it's very important that there's no need to repeat some of this when they launch the devices overseas, and actually it will help in exporting our local manufacturers and devices to go out to other countries. And similarly, if it is recognized by overseas, and when they themselves get certified, it may also help in terms of the importation of the devices here. So as you can see, these 7 components is very complex. It is by no means a small job itself. Because we are still in the beginning infancy stage, nothing is a fix at the moment. And I think the next slide here will actually tell you in terms of the first stage that we are going to work on is really looking at the standards. And I think when we determine the standards, we do not start from scratch, but we look at existing medical policies and the guidelines itself. And I think we looked at it not just within Singapore, but also internationally. And I think this approach serves a few functions. Number one, we want to see whether the industry is familiar with some of these standards. We also want to see how we can harmonize with existing policies that are already in place for cybersecurity in medical devices itself. We also want to look at some credibility and validity of the different kind of standards that have been reviewed before. And I think what we have seen here is you can see 4 different levels. And as the first stage, we are putting up level 1, of which we are saying that actually level 1 would be the baseline cybersecurity requirements that HSA as a medical device regulator has already been looking at. So I think HSA has rolled out what we call the cybersecurity devices standards for medical devices in 2017. And I think for this itself, they have already, as part and parcel of the registration of medical devices, been looking at cybersecurity requirements, as part of their registration review. And I think we do not want to duplicate that. So what happens is when all the devices that have already been registered in Singapore, it will mean that they have already passed a baseline cybersecurity review, and that baseline will be what we call as level 1. I think what we want now is to then work on what is level 2, what is level 3, and what is level 4. I think this is where we will be coming up with a consultation document that will be put out in the public on our public website, within our website itself, and we will be sorting, some of the feedback about the different kinds of requirements and standards that we'll be putting up for level 2, 3, and 4. So do watch out for that. I think this is where we really want to talk to the industry, understand how do we want to phase out the rollout of the different standards in the different levels. And I think this is where, we want to get your feedback. And then in terms of what the standards are, I think we also want to be pragmatic, because we also do not want to roll out everything all at once, such that care will be impeded. I think this is where we really want to see whether there is a means then for us to consult with the industry and face this implementation of the CRS-MD out in the next few years. So I think as a next step, what we are going to do is, besides the consultation, let me just start back with the diagram again. And I think, we must be, when we talk about medical devices, I think we understand that interconnectivity itself. And I think it only forms a portion of this health IT in any of our healthcare organizations in which most of you will be cognizant about. And I think most important to note is all these devices, IT, OT, are connected to the same network. And this means that the strength of the network is only as good as the weakest link. So any breaches that occur is, I think, as we move forward with the higher surface area that will be exposed to attack, would mean that it may get more often, it may get more sophisticated. And a worm can lurk in the network and cause damage when it detects a weakness itself. And I think this is where we also want to see how we can work within this ecosystem with everybody itself. And I think I have 4 main points to conclude. So I think number 1, we know that cybersecurity is integral to patient safety. And there's always, as a regulator here, there's always this balance that we are trying to achieve. I think we should stop thinking about cybersecurity and patient care or patient safety as separate entities. I think I have repeatedly mentioned that patient safety can potentially be adversely impacted if connected devices are breached. However, I think what happens is we also want to avoid swinging to the other end of the spectrum, in which if we are very afraid of anything that comes in to impact patient safety, and we tighten a lot more on the cybersecurity front, then what happens is that it becomes so onerous that we will not be able to get any devices in, and patient care will then be impacted. So I think this delicate balance is something that we as regulators will need to maintain, I think in consultation with the industry, I think in consultation with also the different regulators as well as the public itself. Next, I think wearables. And I think this is where you will also realize that wearables are not in the earlier diagrams that I have put up. But while we do know that a lot of times, and I maybe at this point in time, I would like to put up, get a show of hands, that actually how many of you are wearing a smartwatch now, and how many of your smartwatch can actually monitor your blood oxygen, your ECG, like the new latest iPhone? How many of you here? Maybe just a show of hands. Not a lot, but I would say maybe about 30% of you seems to be doing so. But you can see that increasingly, this is just the beginning. And I think increasingly, the number of people who are going to wear the smartwatch, over COVID, which we have been dealing with over the past 2 years, we have heard a lot of people say, I monitor my own pulse oximeter, and through my oximeter, when it dipped, and when I was feeling breathless, I actually used that as part and parcel of trying to seek medical help. Some people even feel that, using the blood oximeter, they gave them a sense of when they were, likely feeling going to be, if they have some symptoms, they will do an ART test. And sometimes with the antigen rapid test, it may become positive. So you can see that wearables will increasingly become more and more important. I think as it becomes more and more important, then how do we actually understand when you have a wearable or you have a medical device, is it safe for you to connect in? And especially if it's safe for you to connect in and then put that data into your electronic medical records or into any of our institutions' network, because anything could be vulnerable here. I think so. This is where I think we will have to see how, going forward, we will be putting cybersecurity and wearables together hand in hand. While we have all this, I think it's very important to now start looking at manpower. And I think, as a regulator itself, maybe I can also do an open pitch call, whoever is interested to join us, in this venture of looking at medical devices. We are really looking at manpower. I think increasingly, we find manpower in the cybersecurity space getting very tight. I think there is also a tug of war between the public and private sector. How do you actually attract the talents, develop and understand how to remain continuously updated in this cybersecurity space itself? I think it's evolving so fast that even the people are finding it hard, to get acclimatized or to actually get a full understanding of what the latest cybersecurity threats are. I think this is where we also want to start developing and reviewing our own manpower structures and our manpower career development and training scheme, such that actually, our people can actually continuously increase and enhance their knowledge, their skill sets, especially those that are not going as savvy itself. I think this cuts across not just at the cybersecurity space, at the experts, but how do you actually look at it from our BME people? How do you look at it from our people who are managing incidents? And I must also admit, within our own regulatory space, we are also trying to see how we can upgrade ourselves, such as we understand what cybersecurity is about. Because previously, we were also just dealing with paper and pen records. And how do we look at now transforming ourselves to be more digital ready? So you can see, all in all, this CRS-MD scheme, although it's just a start, is also a call to action. And this call to action means that we actually need to now start working together. And we have just taken the first step of looking at CRS-MD as the first step to look at how do we strengthen the pre-market registration part. But subsequently, even with CRS-MD being determined, how do we then look at it across the health life cycle approach? Because we need to make our people who procure the devices understand what CRS-MD is about. We also need to make sure that our clinicians understand what CRS-MD is about. If it is not connected, do you actually allow certain levels of cybersecurity levels? And if it's connected, do you want a higher level? And how do you actually use that as part and parcel of a scheme, to detect some of the threats, and how do you use that as a scheme to actually be able to take some form of regulatory actions? And I think this requires a dialogue amongst the regulators, the industry itself. And I think I won't belabor the point, and I must say that, although I've been said that I'm introducing this CRS-MD, and you will only hear that the CRS-MD at this current moment in time is just looking at level 1, which is the baseline security requirements. We have much work to do to now work together collaboratively, locally, within the different stakeholders, and globally, with the different cybersecurity experts here, so that we can actually move this into the next era of trying to see how we can elevate CRS-MD across medical devices, both locally and internationally. So with that, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chua. For our next panel session that's taking place on stage, we would love for our audience to be interacted with as well. So we'll be using Slido for our question and answer segment. Please do use the camera function of your smartphone right now to scan the QR code shown on the screens to input your questions for our panel of speakers. And I'll now like to introduce the next session, a medical panel discussion led by our moderator, Mr. Teo Xiangzheng, Vice President and Head of Advisory at Ensign Infosecurity. And joining him for this panel, we have Mr. Chang Kai Fan, Chief Operating Officer for Asia at the CLS Certification Lab in SGS Brightside. Associate Professor Lo Ching Ui, Chief Technology Officer at Shears Healthcare Group, as well as Ms. Paul Chua, Cybersecurity Officer for Greater Asia at Becton Dickinson Company. Can I invite the gentleman on stage, please? And now that we have Mr. Teo and our panelists on stage, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome again, panelist speakers. I think we have quite an interesting mix of panelist speakers, and I do welcome the audience joining us in person here in the hall, as well as those joining online to send across your questions. I'll be taking a look at them shortly. What we will start off with is each of the panelist speakers will actually take a short moment to run through some of the content and knowledge that they are willing to share. Maybe we start off with Prof. Lau.
Me? Am I the first? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and the organizing committee for inviting me here today. Actually, the journey here for me, first I started off as a clinical person in 1980 as a medical officer. At that time, we were always looking at new devices, and I was the one who keep on asking for all these new medical devices to make our life better, to make our patient care better. And at that time, the good news at that time was that everything was analog. And for me, I apologize to the audience that I don't have any slides. I have actually the most secure cyber security device here with me. And even if you get this, you can't read my writing because I'm a clinician, so it's a very safe document. But as we move beyond in 1980, when I started, to about 2007, for me at that time, I started being interested in administration as well as health IT. And that was when I started to learn about approving all the requests that comes in. And at that time, it was never a consideration to look at cybersecurity. It was always to see whether the device that they are asking for is useful for improving the care of the patient. It is safe, it is accurate, it does what it's supposed to do. Then, of course, things happened in 2018, where we all were shaken up by the cybersecurity event. But at my level at that time, when I was doing the CMIO work in the public healthcare sector, the thing that struck me most wasn't the rushing around and trying to secure the network, but the impact of a lot of things that didn't work because of the action we took, which was internet separation. So a lot of things that we took for granted and was using it for clinical care suddenly got disrupted because we lost the ability to connect to the internet. And it made us think, for those of us in the medical informatics world, made us think, so what happens when we are not connected? And connection is a key point in our healthcare digitization process that has been occurring for the last 10 years before all this happened. And actually, what isn't well known is that in 1 year after the cybersecurity incident, when one of the classes was trying to deploy electronic medical a patient, what they call it, display for their bedside, they discovered malware in the hardware itself for the devices that they bought. And that, again, is another wake-up call that the security of medical devices isn't something to be traveled with. And that's where the ministry initiated a IoT task force, and it later led on to the MDOC, which is the Medical Device Oversight Committee chaired by Professor Raymond Chua. Now, I think it was alluded to somewhere in slides that Dr. Prof. Chua has mentioned, is that there's the process of people, process, and technology. The people that we talk about start from the patient, and I think patients were long existing before the moment in history, in the lifespan of the human, when they started getting sick or they get injured. And the doctors only came in after that to learn how the science of managing them. Then, of course, came the engineer that managed all the electronic device, and I think Raymond talked about the BME, the department. They were there to make sure all the equipment in the hospital were working well and connected and doing what it's supposed to do. So all that, they were tested and rigorously and make sure they're safe. And there are all these maintenance process and so on. And then later, past the 2000 period, year 2000 onwards, we started digitizing a lot of our IT system. A lot of our system became digital. X-rays became digital. Labs were all now online. And so everything started moving towards the digital direction. And then only recently, in the people context, are the cybersecurity people. And I think Raymond had one very nice slide about the manpower that is needed. And there's a lot of, there's a CIO, the CISO, and the medical device CISO, and what. It's going to grow a lot in terms of what we need in terms of the people side. Processes, we know, in the healthcare setting, there's the clinical and the operational processes that needs to be considered. From the technology side, if you think about it, we were using analog systems for a long time. The stethoscope is an icon of the medical profession, is now digitized, and there are electronic stethoscopes, and they can be put in the homes, and they can listen to patients' heart and transmit over the net and so on. So the technology is moving very, very fast. And if you look at these three items, technology moves the fastest, then the processes. The people are the people part are the laggards. They are the slowest to move. People need to be educated. People have to learn how to work together to make sure these devices are safe. Whereas from the cybersecurity point of view, people are the ones that the most greatest impact if anything happens. This is where it's more impactful than the technology. There are a lot of technology that can catch up very fast and reduce the impact of a cybersecurity incident, but not the people side. There needs a lot more training, a lot of work, processes need to be improved to make sure things are better. I really like Raymond's talk about the life cycle approach, and this must be really closely tied to me with the MDS2. MDS2 is basically manufacturer's disclosure statement for medical device security. I think it is a document that came up in 2003 and revised in 2013, and then 2019, I think it's the latest version. I looked at it. It is a system of 24 headers, 238 line items, but it tells you a lot of things that we are already thinking, but now it is well defined and very easy for us to take as a reference. So how does it impact the life cycle of that Raymond Chua mentioned? In the development phase and the manufacturing and registration, this self-declaration from the manufacturer allows them to take a reference point in order to make sure that they consider cybersecurity as part of the development and the product life cycle. So it actually has a positive impact. But what is the negative impact? The negative impact in this development phase is when you have so the manufacturing industry is very wide. It can be from small startups to big multinationals. The big multinationals will have the ability, the technology, the support, the engineering, the IT expertise to work continuously to improve their product. But the smaller startups are going to have a challenge. So the question is, how do you balance then a complex CLS system for the smaller companies? In terms of procurement, of course, it really helps the people who are doing the procuring to have a reference document so that they know when the product is being asked for, they know where the vulnerabilities are, and for them, they can always cross-reference. So it is useful from a procurement point of view. From the clinical use, when a clinical user wants to have a device, they would need to ask their vendors, so have you met, what are your vulnerabilities? And from there, they can start looking at it together with their CISOs and who have you, in order to mitigate some of these potential vulnerabilities of the devices. Of course, the detection and the threat detection and monitoring really depends a lot on the skill sets of all the new group of expertise that are coming in, the CISOs of the world. And I think that's where, for them, it is, I think Raymond also gave a very nice, complex picture of all the devices. And I think for a lot of the new CISOs, before you know it and you're into your job, you will realize that as you are doing your work, monitoring all the systems, somebody has already slipped in a new device that you didn't even know about by the clinical side of the house. So I think this is the kind of thing that we need to also continuously work together to make sure that things are improving on that front. Now, the last point I want to make is with regard to the policy and governance section. I think the key here is that because we are dealing with a very heterogeneous vendor environment, a heterogeneous healthcare situation, because like I said, from a public sector, if you adopt a public sector device for monitoring, for instance, you can't just take that device, which has already met all the requirements, and put it into a small GP clinic. The small GP clinic is not going to be able to pay that kind of price that a hospital is able to pay for. So I think we need to make sure that there's a bit of flexibility, allow when there are gaps in the cybersecurity standards, what are the options and workarounds and risk mitigation that you can take with the help of the experts that are together with your team. So at the end of the day, I just want to say that for us in the medical world and in the dealing with this technology thing, the goal is that the patient care must come first. It must be safe, delivered by professionals that are working efficiently with the help of the technology that they put in place. And to do that, we really need to look at how all these processes that we are putting in now work towards creating a positive outcome and experience for the patient. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. Lau. And maybe I can invite Paul next for your segment.
Okay, I will do my presentation here. Okay, as the clicker is here. So my name is Paul Chua. I'm the Cybersecurity Officer of Greater Asia for Becton Dickinson and Company. We are a medical device manufacturer. Our plant is actually in Tuas. For those who are based here, it's that northwestern part of Singapore. In fact, we were one of the first few to set up a plant in Tuas. When we set up at the time, so many years ago, there was nothing but just an army camp in Tuas, right? So BD is actually a global medical device company, right? And our mission is to advance the world of health by improving medical discovery, diagnostics, and the delivery of care. So our commitment to cybersecurity is about protecting what matters, right? And what matters is, of course, patient safety, patient privacy, while maintaining a resilient and thriving healthcare system, right? So maybe let me introduce you to a typical threat landscape that a device manufacturer will face, right? Like us will face. You can see that actually we can look at it from a different angles, right? First, of course, is your traditional IT systems that we use for our enterprise office work. Then the next is the OT systems that we run in our manufacturing plant to produce all that medical device, whether it's going to be needles, syringes, or going to be the big equipment, diagnostic equipment that's going to be half the size of this particular stage, right? And then lastly, it's actually the product security, the embedded product security, product cybersecurity of the medical device that's embedded in the products that we ship, right? So we all need to be aware of all these cyber risks, right? Whether where the attacks can come from, right? If the typical phishing ransomware attack could attack the enterprise, yet at the same time, right, it could also affect the user terminals of our products, right? So I think they have to also we would like to say that the hospitals and the healthcare delivery organizations will also need to be aware of the potential vulnerabilities in this device. And there's a few examples of what is at stake here, right? So there's always that insider threat or intellectual property theft, right? There's ransomware attack that will affect the whole IT system or the OT system. In fact, in some of the more recent attack cases, the supply, I think, if I remember correctly, there was some attacks on the big pharma who's our customers for prefab syringes, and they were down, and it affected the supply of certain antibiotics over a course of time. So those are very real examples of how cyber attack could affect the manufacturer or pharma or the healthcare industries, right? So our commitment to cybersecurity includes the protection of our products, our manufacturing operational technologies, and our enterprise. So what we normally advocate, or we actually advocate, is that we do security by design, and security in use, and security through partnership. So maybe allow me to elaborate a bit more on that. So we want to make sure that whether when we design our products or when we design our internal IT or OT system, we have to have that security in mind. A very typical saying is that we want to shift security more to the left when it comes to developing products, right? Or developing and putting on into a new system, right? At the inception stage, we want to make sure that the developer or the architect thinks of security as we go along, right? And the next is how do we ensure security in use? A lot of times, our devices are going to be used by our customers, and for internal customers, it could be the different businesses or the manufacturing plant, right? And want to make sure that they can, though we're also advocating that there's a shared responsibility with our users to ensure that these devices are used according to how they should be used, the network are constructed properly, whether it's going to be zero trust, whether there's multi-factor authentication, whether they're, how they're going to make sure that all the network design are segregated properly, firewalls, everything, you know, put in, right? And finally, we're also advocating that we should enhance security through partnership. Right? We want to be transparent. We want to work with our customers. We want to work with the regulators, the authorities, to build a proper cybersecurity ecosystem. Right? Internally, I think we are one of the first few to run in the medical industry to run the likes of what we call a tabletop exercise. Right? In the event that there's an attack, how do we coordinate internally? And the external part, we are into various associations and liaising with each regulators and country authorities to make sure that we comply to those cybersecurity regulations and to be transparent in our cybersecurity postures to them. So allow me to share with you our BD cybersecurity framework. We are actually very proud of this framework because for quite a long time, this is the cybersecurity framework that you can download from the US FDA website. If you Google US FDA cybersecurity framework, they actually point to a website, and what you see, you clicked, is actually a BD cybersecurity framework, right? And it was used by FDA as a model cybersecurity framework for medical device manufacturers. So this serves as a blueprint for managing cyber risk across all our products, manufacturing, and IT systems, right? So inside embedded there's like the 33 essential cybersecurity requirements that we demand all our developers or architects to take note and to embed into their products or systems. And it is, we are proud to say that this is aligned to multiple industry standards, such as ISO, the MedTech Joint Security Plan by HSCC, and some of the NIST elements are also inside, and the UL 2900 certification elements are also inside. So that is what governs, that's, I would say, our roadmap or our blueprint that how the whole team functions when we go to work every day. So these are some of the our partnership that we have forged throughout the industry, right? So you can see that the likes of the authorities, we have standards and regulations. We have like the distinguished CSA. We work closely with FDA, right? In fact, we had Suzanne Schwartz, who's the director for cybersecurity at FDA, to present at our latest Cybersecurity Awareness Month, right? Which we educate our employees on the essential cybersecurity principles every year. And we are also one of the few private enterprise contributors to IMDRF, right, International Medical Device Regulators Forum. In fact, we have been instrumental in contributing to the likes of, to drafts of software bill of materials under the working group N60. And for the other parts, intelligence, we are tapped onto the likes of FBI, InfraGard, and at the same time, we are also a CVE issuing authority. So when we discover a vulnerability, we can actually put in our own CVE number, right? In par with the likes of Microsoft and other big software groups, software companies. And as for industry association, you can see that we're in the likes of we are in the working committees of the likes of AvaMed, MedTech Europe, APAC Med, right, and HISEC. In fact, we work very closely with HISEC. We're one of the few that has direct feeds into HISEC. And at the same time, we have also forged other private partnerships here in the region and across the globe. So one of the things that we want to advocate is that we have our own cybersecurity trust center, very much like the big software companies. And we want to be very transparent and open with our cybersecurity postures. If we have a vulnerability, we'll do self-declaration, you'll be on our trust center, right? So you want to learn more about our approach to cybersecurity or find out when is our latest disclosure, how we do our software coordinated disclosure, vulnerability disclosure, do visit us at our trust center. And thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel and to share with you our cybersecurity framework and what BD does to advance the world of cybersecurity in the world of health. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. And next, maybe Kaifan.
Hi, I think I probably is the newbie in this medical industry. So I started working as an evaluator like 16 years ago in Brightside. And at that time, I think I was the only high assurance CC evaluator with a Chinese background in the world. And then we were concentrating more on the IC and the payment and identity, those kind of security evaluation and certifications. I think the first time I came in contact with medical device was when I was researching for new customer and I reached out to BlackBerry. And the next day I got an email back say, our CSO, Chief Security Officer, want to talk to you. And I thought, okay, whether it's a big problem or it's a hit the jackpot. So eventually it's totally a different topic because they were working with the US Diabetic Association on creating a new security standard for diabetic device, which is like the artificial pancreas or the insulin pump, which was in high alert at that time. So our CEO flew over to US and created DTSec protection profile together with them. And that was our first endeavor in medical security world. And then it was last year when we were acquired by SGS and became SGS Brightside. I'm tasked to operate our Asian labs to develop medical security evaluation services. And then I started to encounter with the FDA requirements, the MDR requirements. Also, we see that China has the NMPA, Japan has a JPAL that will be mandatory next year, Korea, FDA, Taiwan, FDA. So you can see that everywhere in the world is developing. And today, of course, the COS MD label. So we're just very happy to be involved in this panel and also in this industry to have this conversation together on how we can use the security evaluation knowledge of the high assurance product to the medical world. And I think that's my goal of today, to have the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just recap a few key things that I think are meaningful for us to discuss a little. Dr. Chua mentioned a little earlier about the use of MDS2. Prof. Lau, you also echoed it. And one key thing was about TR67, which is our local technical reference 67, which kind of stratifies what are the controls or requirements that has been laid out in MDS2, in particular to the medical device classes that we have in Singapore. Maybe if any of the panelists could actually shed some light, how do you think TR67 could actually lay on valuable insight to the different medical device security levels? Maybe Paul?
I think I was quite heartened to keep hearing MDS2, right?
Yes.
Because the fact that BD, at BD, we have actually been using MDS2 as part of that guidance for medical device cybersecurity posture, right? And in fact, starting from 2017 or maybe earlier, I can't remember, if I can remember, right? We have actually embedded MDS2 into what we call a product security white paper. It is a customer-facing documentation which we will give to our customers to highlight the cybersecurity posture and what to do with it, right? Whether there's sensitive information involved and how we're going to put this into the network. And at the end of it, we will normally put a MDS2 form filled up to tell the customer, of course that was version 1, and lately there was MDS2 form version 2, and we went through a big refresh of that, which covers even more. And we have tied in with our 33 essential cybersecurity requirements with MDS2. So it aligns very nicely with what the MDS2 wants. So a lot of times when people wants to say, hey, tell me how you do security, we'll give them the product security white paper. And then after that, they'll say, oh, what about this, how you do IAM, how do you do data storage and all that? I said, please refer to page this, and inside there you'll see the MDS2 form, and there's the clause that will highlight to you how this particular product will handle data storage or will handle identity and access management. So that is BD's approach when it comes to using MDS2 form.
And maybe Prof. Lau, as from a healthcare service provider perspective, when you receive MDS2, how do you think that actually supports you from a risk assessment, from a use of the product's perspective?
Actually, I was quite fascinated by that document in that it was quite it came about much earlier in time, and it was refreshed, I think, 2013 and I think 2018 or so. But the headings that they were there, I think there are 24 headings, are kind of the principles that we are looking at anyway. But because they have articulated in a very interesting format and grouped everything according to them with the specific line items, it is not inconceivable that for us in the medical informatics world to be able to look at it and say, aha, I know what you mean by putting this clause in place. And yes, we are also looking at that. And it's easy for us to have that reference check. I mean, there are higher end technical things that the clinician may not be able to understand. But then this is where the industry and the experts will be able to guide whoever is coming in. But that document is invaluable for us to have a look at it, to look at the fact that this device that we want has certain types of self-declared vulnerabilities. And we can look to our colleagues at the CISO level and the IT level and say, okay, can we mitigate this? Is this something that we can, if it's a device, do we need to be integrated with our system? Can we have a segment the network so that it can still work anyway? So I think these are the kind of the value of a reference document like MDS2. I looked at it, I found it fascinating that it is wide coverage. And if you haven't seen the document, I think it's worth going to look at it.
Right.
Yeah.
And Kaifan, maybe if you've come across MDS2, how does that actually support from a technical testing perspective? How does technical testing actually bring the requirements or controls from MDS2 further?
I think MDS2 itself is really a good reminder on what the developers of medical device should do and should provide the information. Because when we are starting with the medical device evaluation, it is very clear that most of the developers, they don't even have any idea on what they have to prepare for an FDA or other security evaluation. So the most common thing is that, do you have a risk assessment ready based on cybersecurity? Do you have this and that document ready? And the answer is no. What is that? I don't know how to do it. So on one side, if we have like an MDS form where you have to write down this kind of information, it gives the developer a good idea on what they have to think about. Also, it will, of course, be better for the secure by design and all the parts, and eventually at the security evaluation part, it will be much easier because you have all the material ready, and we just have to give you a proof that by doing testing that what you're claiming is true. I think it's very nice overall for the industry.
Great. I want to circle back to one more point which is fascinating for me, which is BD's approach towards cybersecurity. In particular, you highlighted security through partnership. And Dr. Chua highlighted earlier about the need to collaborate with other stakeholders and experts in the ecosystem. Clearly, you have had more history. Could you highlight a little bit about the benefits and the challenges when BD started reaching out to different partners and the ecosystem to be able to help bolster the cybersecurity of your products and services?
Yeah. So that's a very excellent question, right? Because we get asked as BD when we go out and talk about cybersecurity, we get asked very often, "You are a medical device company. Why are you so much into cybersecurity, right? Wow, you do so much in cybersecurity. Does that mean your device is going to cost me more, right?" Those are the questions that we kind of get asked a lot. But to BD, I think one of the key elements is that whatever we do in terms of cybersecurity, it has direct relationship with patient safety. To us internally, we have this culture to say that this anything that in case there is a breach, a vulnerability, it has direct relations to quality, right? And you know, in terms of the medical device field, qualities of once you have a customer complaint, you have to report within 48 hours, and you have to have a lot of investigations, and eventually, if something is not right, you can face a product recall. Maybe we are not at the stage in terms of cybersecurity, but in BD, we treat cybersecurity as equal importance as what we feel in terms of defects in any of our medical device. So that's why there is that heightened awareness within the organization. And at that time, when we were in partnership in early days with the likes of FDA, right, helping them to draft their pre-market and post-market documents that they have come up with, there were definitely challenges, right? And it was not easy to get the message across because a lot of times the one that's doing IT and because of IT is cybersecurity might not be the same team that's in charge of the clinical care or the clinical operation of the device. And that's where I think the challenges is to bridge the gap between the two. A lot of times BD becomes the intermediary, and it's also because that we are very bold to bring this whole concept idea across that we get to work with a lot of the associations, right? For example, we were in the founding member, the HSCC, the Healthcare Coordination Council, and to come up with a MedTech Joint Action Plan. In fact, we were also working with APAC Med that we have the honor to work with the likes of the authorities here for CRS-MD. So those were the steps that we see, because we feel that we cannot, cybersecurity is a team sport, right? We have to work together. You cannot isolate yourself, right, and try to make everything secure by yourself. Because it's a very simple fact. You're using off-the-shelf products, open source libraries, right? How do you ensure that some of these COTS products or open source libraries become secure? That means you have to collaborate with the rest to make your product secure. That's a very simple workflow or logic that we have to follow. And because of that, you have to be open and transparent and be willing to work with everybody. That's also our culture, right? Which is why the title of my presentation back then was Collaborating to Advance Cybersecurity in the Medical Industry, right? So that's BD stand, and we have been doing that for the past 5-6 years with great results. We see the industry moving, everybody's aware now. There's a lot of activities going on. I think it's good for the industry, right? Of course, there are more to be done, right? We want to get more people on board such that we can make our medical device secure and provide better and quality care to our customers or our patients.
Please.
I like your point. And what happens if a medical device fails? Let's say a monitoring device.
Yes.
The first one to notice may be the patient, but it's likely to be the doctor. The doctor then calls who? The engineer. Is this a faulty failure of the mechanical part, or what's wrong with this machine? It's not working. Somewhere in there in the process, do they call the cybersecurity. Is this a hack?
Yes.
Okay? And the process of understanding why that device failed is a complex one. And I think that's one of the big challenges we have. I'm not sure how you deal with it, but if you're in a cybersecurity conference, everything is a cybersecurity problem, right? But when a device fails, it could be the something in the electronics, it could be something that the user didn't do properly. There are many, many reasons why a device failed. And it's not all cybersecurity. But the question is, if it is cybersecurity, how quickly do you know that it's a cybersecurity event?
Right.
It is not like the network system or the IT system. When the system actually goes down, is it a router problem or is it a cybersecurity attack? But a device, a single device, if there's a lot of devices going down, yes, there might be an association, it might be a cyber. But when one patient suffers as a result of a security malfunction, what do? They secure the device, they send it to the manufacturer. And there's no cyber. Then the next one comes in. Maybe that's a cyber. Or is that another security failure? I mean, a device failure.
Right.
So these are some of the challenges that even though we can have all these checks in place and everything else, the actual analysis of devices is very uniquely problematic in I'm sure in other industries as well, but we need to learn from the other industries. How fast can you detect something from a mechanical or a engineering failure to that of a cybersecurity problem?
And I think that goes back to what Dr. Chua highlighted earlier, the balance between cybersecurity and patient safety, right? There's always that ambiguity, of course you have to prioritize human health, right? And at the same time, how can I really trust what the device is actually telling me or is going to execute? And those are some of the challenges. I'm looking at some of the questions that are coming through, and I'll attempt to summarize some of them. The first question is really about what do we think as a panel, the panel of speakers, the challenge might be in bringing people on board for the CLS MD scheme, right? Maybe Paul, being a device manufacturer, what do you think are some of the key challenges for others to come on board?
Well, to be honest, I think one of the main challenges, of course, you have to balance between the cost of getting more testing done to get label while coming on board, and balance out how do you will this affect the marketing of your device or the use of your device, right? There's always that balance, right? I can hear that the word balance has been spoken quite a bit. Yes, we probably have to look at the balance of how we can still have that acceptable risk in terms of cybersecurity, and at the same time still allow the market to grow vibrantly. I think that is something, the challenge. As a device company, internally we have our struggles too, right? We have our development team saying that, hey, if you're going to do extra tests, it's going to overrun the development cost, right? And that's the struggle that we have internally, not just on CRSMD. Internally, when we do our risk assessment and we recommend pen testing some of our own devices, we get pushbacks from the development team for various reasons of lead time and cost, right? So those are very genuine questions, because it's always the time to market and how much you can sell into the market versus the cost to do that in terms of time and resources.
Prof. Long, we mentioned a little bit in our side chat about the underdogs, startup medical device manufacturers that may not be as well resourced or may not be as aware of cybersecurity controls. If you could elaborate that again.
Yeah. In the last 2 years or so, I've been involved in the nature of my work to help GP groups use technology to, for instance, do triaging in their clinics. Can use a device that detects whether the patient is in distress, the vital signs are abnormal, with a finger device or something very simple. Why? Because you know that they are very crowded, they are potentially really sick ones, but how do you triage the sick ones from the non-sick ones? And how do you then think about making it more efficient for them to pick up the sick ones? And then we come across many devices that claim to do this kind of function, triaging function, vital signs kind of detection. Then so within this group of range of products, there are some that are very, very sophisticated. They have gone through pen testing, and you know from their when talking to their senior management and their team, they tell you that their devices are even individually pen tested in order before they go on sale. So there is a lot of quality in those companies that have big engineering support for those devices. But in our local startup, we have a lot of people who are looking at what is the problem. So it could be somebody detecting, developing a system to detect for wound care, the infrared and so on. So they're going to develop the technology. They're thinking, and the engineering people are really working on the problem, trying to detect how to improve their wound care detection and so on. Where does the cybersecurity come in? It comes in when you start putting a lot of identified material into when you're connecting it to the system. It starts looking at whether your device can be hacked because you are using it connected to the internet, or is it hacked when you are doing a firmware upgrade, that kind of thing. So the smaller companies are not likely to be able to check box yes for all the MDS2 or even the curated MDS2 when we finally go to level 2, level 3, level 4. But the idea is that if you have that as a reference for them to work on, they can then tell the user, we can't do this, but this is how you can potentially mitigate some of this way in which the vulnerabilities are identified. So we don't have this, it is on our roadmap.
Right.
It is 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, but we will get there. But in the meantime, this is what you do. And whether they advise you or your own CISO advise you, that's something that we can work around so that we don't stop these devices from coming in. Because if you are going to be very firm on your requirements, then you're going to kill a lot of innovation in smaller companies. But the question is, how do you balance?
Yeah.
One, if you put it at an unequal playing field, then the big companies will say, I made so much investment, I should be the one getting in. But then your cost is high.
Yes.
And you can't put it out to the smaller companies that need it. I mean, the GP clinics that need it. They cannot afford a $10,000, $20,000 device that the clusters can afford.
Yep.
They're going to have one that costs $2,000. But with that kind of margins, I'm sure the gap is there also in not just in cost, but in the security standards.
Right.
Or quality standards as well.
Yes. And I think it goes back to what, Paul, you highlighted earlier about the shared responsibility model. Following what Dr. Chua said, it was the CLS-MD as its first interest is also declared from a part of the registration phase, its intended use. And we're very clear that many of the modern medical devices actually come with connectivity, intelligence, and many other new digital features. And sometimes, as users or consumers of such products, you might say, my specific use case will have a different application of it. I might turn off certain features, and how does that actually play out? We discussed a little bit during our side chat, how then can the consumers risk assess this applied space, right? The device has a lot of capabilities, but I only have a very narrow use case. Or I misappropriate its capabilities for other purposes. Maybe the panelists can discuss a little bit there.
I've got one example of that.
Please.
During COVID, there was a company that came to us and said, look, here's a portable ultrasound.
Yes.
You can use it to detect, scan the lung and detect, lesions that are potentially indicative of a COVID deterioration.
Right.
So we said, fine. And they said that, this device is connected to the internet. It goes to our center in US where the AI does the interpretation and gives the information back to you. So we said, wow, that means you're going to send personal identifying information, you're going to send it there, you're going to process it, send it back to you to make sure you think. There is concern about this. But then we said, if you're going to use it then maybe you have to turn off the AI, right? And let the users who are trained in it to be able to use it for that purpose. So it's lightweight, it's cheaper,
Yes.
it has a potential use. So, but do we say no, you cannot use it?
Yeah.
Or do we say, well, use it, but don't turn on the AI?
Yeah.
So these are some of the things that we are faced with.
Yes.
And I think that's where, if you understand the risk, then you can think about what you can do to mitigate it.
And maybe let's switch gears a little, Kaifan. One of the burning questions that many have is, what are the most common challenges and issues that you face in testing medical devices?
Yeah, so maybe I can comment a little bit on the previous one about the challenges
Yes.
of the COS. In all the time that I'm doing this evaluation service sales, or let's say business development, there's no company that will do security if it's not required. So whether it's by government or it's by market, so you have to do this, otherwise you cannot sell your product or no one will buy your product. So on one side, it could be a challenge, but if the government says you have to do this, otherwise you cannot sell your product, then it's not a challenge. Everyone has to do it. But then the challenge comes from the cost and all those things. And that can, on the other side, be solved by security composition or mutual recognition and this kind of things. So it always depends on if we think it's really an important issue, if it's worth become a mandatory thing. So that's our thoughts on this issue. And we have been doing a lot of medical device testing until last year. But what we really face or what we see as issue in the medical device testing or certification type of thing or just general security, one is what I already mentioned is the awareness of security. People can do risk assessment, but if they don't know what is possible, what are the cybersecurity issues they have to think about, they cannot map it back to what kind of risk or this is the technology you use and this has certain risk because of this attack is possible. So that knowledge is really missing in at the developer side, if it's a smaller developer at least. And that's the first hurdle. And then during the testing, of course, because you didn't think about all those things, you can see a lot of mistakes in your product. And that can be shown by simple penetration testing, fuzzing, and all those kind of things. So I think the cause of all the things is originated from the awareness and knowledge about cybersecurity, which of course the lab can help you, but also you might need to develop it yourself. And a huge challenge in not only medical, but I see in all connected device is that the old certification or evaluation model is not really working because the products are updated so frequently.
Yes.
So you can use software and then, okay, every month there are new attacks coming in and you have to patch it, you have to do all the things. And that will be a very big issue that actually I don't know if we really can solve it with certification to keep, is on one side you want a device that is certified or on the other side you want a secure updated device that is not certified. So I see that as a big challenge for security evaluation.
I think we are circling around the topic that basically that cybersecurity in the medical device space is a multidisciplinary problem, right? I think Prof. Lau, we mentioned that the ramp-up journey is actually very steep for whether it is a cybersecurity professional entering healthcare or a healthcare professional trying to understand cybersecurity. Either directions are actually very challenging. And that's further exacerbated by the multiple disciplines of healthcare provision in and of itself. So merging the two, the digital, the cyber, the technology with conventional healthcare is a great challenge there. And I think Dr. Chua was also highlighting about the need for talent development programs, bringing people into the ecosystem so that meaningful dialogues are actually taking place. And I thought that's where the partnership conversations that Paul, you highlighted, also come into play. Going a little bit about what we are seeing as novel medical devices that are coming up, I think wearables was already highlighted by Dr. Chua. We are seeing the emergence of software as a medical device and software in a medical device, the likes of your firmware and sophisticated tools, regardless of whether they are in the device or they are in the cloud, at the edge or otherwise. how do we think this new development space is actually complicating the embedding of cybersecurity, particularly with the likes of your external services, cloud connectivity, privacy, as we mentioned, and maybe a little to extend that, how does SBOM help in that whole conversation?
Maybe
Oh, yeah,
I
go
will
ahead.
start.
Yes.
Okay, since I mentioned SBOM. I think software as a medical device, it's I would say, an inevitable trend, right? We can see that whether it's a mobile app or a lot of time will be cloud, digital sensors sending data to a central site, and the challenges are definitely there, but internally we treat them just the same cybersecurity discipline, right? Design, security by design, security in use, security partnership. What complicates now is that there is this other third party called cloud service provider, right? That's going to be an inclusion. And if you read all their T's and C's, right, they always say, oh, it's a shared responsibility. I will take care of the infra, you take care of your app and things like that. So that has put in another element that we have to be very mindful, especially on the data storage and data transfer side. We have to, because that will cover even a wider attack surface now that the data is going to be stored in cloud, right? And so I would say the cyber security discipline will be we have to still follow, right? Whether this time when it comes to development, you have to watch out for the OWASP top 10, right? Just to make sure you don't, when you develop web application or mobile application, you adhere to those OWASP top 10 alerts, right? To make sure that you don't go out of line, right? Or make your apps really vulnerable. And at the same time, you have to work very closely with your cloud service provider, because now they are holding your data. They are providing, a lot of times, providing the connectivity to your end customer, right? So I would emphasize that the partnership and collaboration effort has to increase, right? Because you no longer control your servers and the connectivity that you have, right? Or it's no longer just between you and your customer, which is maybe the healthcare delivery organization or maybe the end customer. But now there is another intermediary, which is the CSP, right? Or some will be not just the cloud service provider, but even the app provider, right? That you might be using. So those are the complicated relationship that will add multiple layers of complication. But the opportunity is that you have to open yourself up to more collaboration and ensure that everybody, the teamwork has to be there to play ball in terms of in the game of cybersecurity.
Kaifan, do you have anything to add on how does technical testing get complicated, especially with the extension of services beyond a device itself?
So I think if we talk about software as a medical device, the biggest problem is how is the device built, because it is not standalone.
Yes.
It is building on a certain OS, and it is still built on a certain platform. And that makes things very scattered and difficult. It's like when we talk about, are you using Windows, are you using Linux, are you using Android? Which version of the Android? Is it supported or not yet supported? And the open source software you might use, and that complicates the whole things. When we look at security, first we look at interfaces. We always think, what are the possible interfaces we can use, or as an attacker, they can use to attack the product. And software interfaces are much more complex than hardware interfaces. And that makes the whole analysis very difficult. And when we're doing the real testing, at this moment, people are also very reserved to provide full source code, or they cannot even provide the full source code. That also slow down things, because we cannot really understand the thing. And if we extend it to software in the devices, and there's also the software bill of material discussion is coming, and that's just very difficult to keep up. How do you keep up all the different things and then say, oh, this is a new version and this has this kind of problem or that kind of problem, or it complicates or influences the security of other components. And that's we think the most complicated part about software as a medical device or in a medical device.
Yeah, and I think it alludes towards an underlying question about the cost when it comes towards certification by testing, right? I think many medical devices that I've spoken to are embracing DevSecOps, which basically means that nearly every other day there's a brand new version that's coming out, if not several versions, right? And we are talking about the cloud-based services as well. You can change very rapidly. So SBOM, I think Paul, we highlighted that in the side chat, that even to build a SBOM is not so straightforward.
Yes.
There are complications with what are available in the ecosystem, and I'm referring to solutions that help to build SBOMs. Maybe you would like to recount that for the audiences here.
Yeah, I missed your question on the SBOM earlier, right? Getting ahead of myself, I guess. So in terms of SBOM, we feel that it's a very good initiative because it gives a very structured list, machine-readable list of your software components, right? Whether it's going to be your in-house software that you develop, or it's going to be your third-party open source or licensed software that you want to embed in your whole software and product, right? But however, in our current experience is that we realize that even if we choose one of the formats, right, whether it's going to be SPDX or Cyclone DX, right, and we realize that there is still many elements of this whole landscape that is still missing. In fact, we have to write, sometimes we have to write our custom scripts to merge all the SBOM into one big format in order to present it to our testers, our pen testers, right? And a lot for them to review. And because there are different formats, different elements to it, so I think we can use some commercial off-the-shelf software, but there's still some missing gaps. When we look at the whole development lifecycle, which part of the software, there's still some missing elements that we need to write customs and get a developer to write some custom scripts to merge everything together. It could be some simple Excel VBA scripts, right? Or some it's a shell scripts that will PowerShell shell scripts that will help to merge some of these documents to SBOM formats documents together into one big SBOM that they were able to use. So we're still, I felt personally, or our team felt that we are still in a very early stage when it comes to SBOM. And to be honest, IMDRF is only going to publish its SBOM document, I think, somewhere next year, first quarter next year.
Yes.
It's in its final draft, but even after that, for the industry to embrace it, it's going to take maybe a couple of years.
Yes.
But hopefully by then, the product will be able to catch up for us to be able to churn out machine-readable SBOMs, right, master SBOMs, across all our software components eventually.
And maybe Prof. Lau, being on the service provider side, asset management or asset inventory is always going to be a pain. Do you have an opinion about how SBOM actually makes it more difficult or makes it easier for you?
Okay, so I reached the limit of my understanding. Okay, as a clinical person, I'm lost in the last 2 minutes of this discussion. I honestly admit.
Okay.
But I do know that the fact that we are dealing with so many different types of technology and everything, there's no one solution for everything. You need the whole suite of people, process, and technology, right? So I think there are certain things that are potentially at risk which you can tackle at the people level. And I think one of the questions there is quite interesting. The people level, there is the technology level, as well as the process level.
Yes.
And a lot of times when something breaks in a cybersecurity cycle, it could be one of the above, or 2 or 3 of the above, where there's the combination of failures. You can have processes in place, but nobody's following it.
Right.
You can have what you call patches that you need to do that nobody's doing it. The patches themselves need to be monitored. You don't just let someone in and then forget to lock them out after that, and then you get security leak and so on.
Right.
So there are a lot of things that are multifaceted, and I think what I need to do is read up on what you just said There's a lot of things that I need to catch up on. That's why I'm here.
Right.
Over the years, I learned by diffusion. Okay, I work with CISOs so that they teach me and I teach them. So it's that kind of a relationship.
Maybe I can give a 1-minute quick intro about SBOM, or software bill of materials, right? So what it does is that it gives a list of all the software components in your product. So for example, if you use certain open source software libraries, you'll be listed there. Your own internal libraries can also be listed, of course. And at the end of it, you will come up with a list which is machine readable, or it can be also human readable, so that whenever you want to, your customers or the pen testers or whoever wants to look at your software components, they will know which are the components. It was very much like food labels. You want to know, let's say, your chicken rice. What is the component of chicken rice? Right? In the packet chicken rice, they'll tell you chicken rice component percentage. That is also one of the key things. But what is good about this SBOM is that if you hit a vulnerability, you want to know which are your components that's affected. Right, today, I will very honestly, I will tell you that it will take us a long time, right? Without SBOM, it will take us a long time to go through every single component to find out which one is vulnerable, right? Before we can say we are affected, right? I will tell you a very real example. Just a couple of months ago, we had a XML library issue. I won't say which XML library. It took us quite a few days to find out one of our products is affected. But that was not the end. When we are about to have that disclosure, voluntary disclosure to the public that this is a product affected, another development team raised out their hand and say, hey, I have another product that's affected. And suddenly we have to go back to the work and say that, oh, are you sure? Can you go through? So we have to redraft our disclosure document because now we have more products that's been affected by this particular component library. So SBOM itself, in our opinion, is a very good, I would say, a feature to have, right? Because it will allow us to, and the developers or the InfoSec team to track down the vulnerable software components in a very short time.
And I think as an extension, it also complements the challenges, which is you can't run any number of testing, right? We were talking earlier about the cost of implementing such a technical tests as well as certification. It complements as one of the many other options, which is vulnerability monitoring and therefore being able to address them through patching or version upgrades. I think the problem is also further exacerbated where you have products that are running in healthcare institutions for protracted period of time, right? So while you may know the most current set of devices that you've pushed out, what the kind of components are, but when you go towards the history, the products that are sold 10, 5, 15 years ago, you might not be having that level of detail. So that also adds to the complication.
Correct. And I think the key thing is that if you look at the capital investment life cycle for medical devices, it's normally longer than your typical IT products, which is like 2, 3, 5 years. A medical device could hit 10, 20, 10, 20 years. And that itself means that your product life cycle management has to be more stringent than what IT products should take. And so a lot of times, point very well taken is that we do get calls when we encounter a vulnerability, discover a vulnerability that there's a product that we encounter that even the OS itself, Microsoft stopped supporting, and we have to go back and ask for additional support, the likes of Windows 7. Who still runs Windows 7? I would say some of us will still raise our hands in some of our devices, and we have to ask for additional support. So those were the very key issues that we encounter, and it's through, hopefully through SBOM that we can solve some of these issues and give, like you said, give us that vulnerability alert and allow us to take action at a shorter notice.
Yes. I think we have a question that is very broad, but tickles the deeper aspects of the challenges that we see unique to Singapore. The context really comes from the fact that being a small nation state, in contrast to many other larger economies, we probably will become a price taker, and there will be challenges in us pushing for a higher standard of things. And as we are about to roll out this concept of CLSMD, each one of you maybe to share your opinion about who really has this higher set of responsibilities, and to maybe call out the ecosystem that we see, right? There's the medical device manufacturer, there is the resellers, the distributors, the systems integrators. Then of course you have your healthcare service providers, and last but not least, the regulators and the patients. Who do you think really has that highest responsibility in trying to encourage for a higher state or maturity level of cybersecurity for medical devices? I'll maybe start with Kaifan.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's a complicated question because it doesn't have just one answer. Let me just have two extreme cases. If you think about clinical device, medical device, when you're going to do an MRI, you'll not say, whoa, wait a minute. You don't have a COS MD level 4 sticker on this MRI machine, so I'm not going to do anything. No, you don't have a choice to accept this thing. So I would say in this clinical device, probably the manufacturer will have the most responsibility in making sure that the cybersecurity is inside. But on the other extreme, when you have wearables and you have the connected medical device that you use at home, then I think that's a market issue, it's an economic issue. Then you should vote with your dollar as a consumer and then say, I only use a certain product with a certain level of security, and then just make sure that everyone will do that because they know they cannot sell their product. So it's really everything in between, like who will be the responsible party for this.
And I think you're also tickling on the shared responsibility model that not just the cloud service providers are saying, but also, I mean, as an ecosystem, we do think that there's a shared responsibility. Prof. Lau, your comments?
Exactly. I think the question highlighted the highest.
Yes.
I think this is the word you use is collective responsibility.
Yes.
Every chain of this whole, from the time the person who wants to use the machine, the doctor who wants to prescribe it, the healthcare professional wants to prescribe it, to the fact that there's a manufacturer and a seller, everyone has a component of responsibility.
Right.
What at the system level, I mean at MOH level, is to make sure that there are systems in place in order to make sure that you mitigate the risk of any one of these areas. So for instance, if you want to introduce a device to a patient, the patient must know how to use it.
Yes.
He must use it safely. He must have. But do you want to certify him that he's fit to use it? No, you teach him how to do it and ask him to repeat it once, and then you deploy it, right? But that has some responsibility as well. If I just throw the device at you, go and figure it out yourself, read the manual, there's a responsibility there, right? You don't do things in that sense irresponsibly. And I think when you look at all the lists in that questions, that the manufacturers, the doctors, the healthcare provider, or the user patient, or I think there's also somewhere, I don't know about regulators, but everybody has a part to play. To make sure whatever you give to and I state right at the beginning, right, the focus is on the patient.
Yes.
And the provider to make sure that he can deliver the care safely. If you want to use the technology, make sure it's safe. What do you mean by safe? Okay, there's the labeling for the device, the use of the device. So you use the device appropriately. You don't use it inappropriately, and then say that who's responsible. I mean, so the device is the device. It is there. But if you want to use it, make sure you're using within the parameters in which you were designated to use, and then from there work out what are the things. If you think there are problems, how are you going to mitigate it? Do you have a call system back? Do you have an emergency number to call if something is not working, that kind of thing. Don't have a service where you call and nobody answers the phone, and then the guy is suffering with no information or something is not working.
Yes.
So I think that question is a loaded question, but it also means that collectively as a community, we need to be identifying each of us our responsibility
Yes.
when you're deploying a device. Because at the end of the day, I said, your goal is to make the patient care safe that is provided by the provider so that the patient will get a good outcome. That must be the goal. Whether you don't want a situation where as a result of what you do, you lose patient data, or worse still, it becomes a target in which the machine fails because of cybersecurity attack.
Right.
And as a result, instead of reading the normal results, you get all abnormal results, and people are overreacting and killing the patient by ordering more insulin and so on.
Yes.
So I think if you are aware of the risk, you have to think about what is your role, how are you going to mitigate it? Do you need somebody's help, whether it's a manufacturer, or do you need the help of a CISO? Do you need the help of the IT people to be able to throttle extravasation of data, or whatever it is? You need that collective thinking. That's how I'll answer that question.
And Paul?
Okay, so I agree with Prof. Loh. I think this is a loaded question. When I see this question, it reminds me of essay questions, right? You put 3 pros and 1 con, and then you run off with a conclusion, right? So I'm not going to do that. It's going to take too much time. I think what I'll just simply say, what is the responsibility of a device manufacturer? We are supposed to deliver the best quality medical device to the users, right? Whether it's HDO or the patients. Healthcare delivery organizations or doctors, their responsibility is to deliver the best care to the patient, right? So if you look at it, I will still go back to my point that cybersecurity is a team sport,
Yes.
right? So bring back to the CRS MD scheme. I think we are still at a very early stage where we're still thinking of the cost and whatever, but eventually I think maybe we should start thinking that CRS MD would be a mark of quality, right? In terms of trying to deliver the best product. Means that it passed certain cybersecurity checks, it is of a good quality, to deliver that to the patient or the HDOs, right? And then it's a shared responsibility, so that we shouldn't have that argument of who had the highest responsibility, right? The word loaded, as Prof. Loh said, is a loaded question, highest, right? Because once you say who has the highest, means the other party say, okay, I'm just accomplice, or maybe I'm not so much responsible, right? But I think it's a team sport, and I think the industry and the HDOs and the authorities has to work together, right? And we want to move towards, I think, a goal to say that CRSMD eventually will be a mark of quality, right, for everyone, right? And then it's up to the buyers beware. If you want to choose something of a lower quality, it's your choice, right? But as a manufacturer, our responsibility is make sure that we pass CRSMD of a certain level, we ensure that the quality of the device is there.
Right. And I think,
I see the question was also from a TIC colleague, so maybe as TICs, we have a darker thinking of human nature and stuff, because in our view, shared responsibility means no one will take responsibility. No one wants to take the cost. That's why I can imagine like why we need to say who has the highest, because they should be the one responsible and with a certain penalty to make sure things are happening. So I would say I would have a bit different view on if something should be totally shared.
right. I think in any shared responsibility model, there needs to be a very clear, RASI comes to mind, responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. But the definition of each player and their responsibilities needs to be mapped out so that they know exactly what they're supposed to play. right? I think, Paul, you highlighted, like doctors, healthcare providers, you need to deliver the best healthcare to the patient. And likewise, as a medical device manufacturer, you need to create the best product to be able to do what it's built for. But I think let's move a little bit away, and as many medical devices are bringing in on more features, clearly there's a lot more in the cyber supply chain, and there's a bit of that vendor risk management and supply chain management element to that. How would maybe Kaifan, you can start, supply chain related testing actually come into play when we talk about medical devices, and maybe Paul, you can comment after that.
So if we talk about supply chain, because we're talking about cost and responsibility, and I think it makes the whole picture even more complex and even more costly.
Yes.
So I'm from the high assurance background, and when we do a product, when you want security in a product, it's always about the product and the whole life cycle. So we'll check every part that has been in touch with the product from development until delivery to the customer. And that's a very costly thing. That's why common criteria is so expensive and no one wants to do that, right? So, but I think supply chain security is also really important, and especially for medical device or what we see for automotive device, which for automotive device, it already exists. For automotive and the medical, I think the most important fact is that it may kill people. So it becomes a really important issue for security. So I think the challenge is to find a good way to have not so costly supply chain audits or supply chain regulations, and hopefully it will share the cost of security by maybe the composition, because everyone will pay a little bit to support the whole security to make things happen. So I think for me, it's not yet so clear how we should approach it, but it is important.
Paul?
I think supply chain testing or verification is going to get even more important. I'll just relate a very recent experience, right? There was some supply chain transportation supplier issues that caused us some delays in the delivery of our products. And I know because of the pandemic and lockdown in some countries, a lot of us do feel supply chain issues, right? Whether it's components or the final delivery of the product to the customers, that's happening. And but this particular case we encountered was that this particular supplier was encountered malware within their system, and it brought down their system for 3 days, right? And having said that, a couple of years ago, one of the farmers had a similar issue in their internal case, and kid you not, now I just met their CISO recently, and they say they are monitoring all their suppliers, which include us, on their fusion center. So you can see that everyone is also very concerned because we are all interconnected, chain linked together, right? Regardless, right? Whether it's not just IT system, software, supply chain, even physical stuff. How you procure stuff, whether your supplier can deliver those physical goods to you on time, and those are essential raw materials in your production. So those are another aspect that, in fact, this is one of my work stream for my internal team this year to reevaluate the supply chain cybersecurity. How we can make it better. Do we monitor all our suppliers in our SOC, or do we adopt a more risk-based approach?
I think we've stressed a lot on the pre-market related aspects of medical device use and pre-qualification, so to speak. Maybe to go a little bit about the post-market aspects, right? Once it's in use, you still need to manage the risk of its use, right? And there will be more vulnerabilities that are discovered day by day. There will be introduced risks due to changes in the technology environment and so on. How would something like a CLS-MD, maybe at its initial concept, actually support post-market? Maybe Prof. Lau, if you could comment your initial thoughts about it.
I think it's somewhere in that 24 headings that you need to look at what is the life cycle of your product.
Right.
How do you do your maintenance? Because every time, and it's affected by many things. Right? If your system is connected to a network, even when the OS changes and there's an update, you need to test whether your integration works and everything else as well. And in the same way, if as a vendor, you realize that your product has got certain vulnerabilities as detected, but you should legally, at least, and I think somewhere in there, you have to inform and then advise the users of these vulnerabilities and tell them perhaps we will be sending you a patch or whatever it is. So that whole cycle needs to be effected through a contract, like at least a service level agreement that the manufacturer is still responsible after you have sold the thing. Not that I sold it and I go and do something else. You still have a responsibility of ensuring that the product is optimal, is still optimal, and is still secure.
Right. Paul, anything to add?
As a device manufacturer, once in post-market condition means that our device will be used in the customer's environment.
Right.
Again, I would say it's shared responsibility because the customer has to ensure that the environment is secure, right? If, for example, the firewalls, the IDS are not configured properly, even if we put our device in use. That's why we emphasize security in use, right? How are you going to use it? That's also another thing. But I do agree, Prof. Yes, we still have the responsibility for service, and we still have the responsibility to have the proper IFU, technical manual, and even provide the proper services to make sure that it is in use in a proper manner. So that is, I would say, we can't run away from that. That's as a manufacturer or our reseller, system integrators, that's our responsibility. But I think for CLS MD, one of the things that will help us identify is that it will give us a classification to say that this can be in use in the hospital environment in a secure manner, right? Because if I'm just thinking from the side of the HDOs, right? If I build my network according to ministry guidelines, it should be of reasonable security standard. I want to buy something that can build that circle or trust that these devices can come into my network, right? So I think that is the role that I felt that maybe perhaps CLSMD can play, right? It's again a buyer beware thing, right? Where you buy this particular device, it's level 2 or it's level 3. That means it's been tested, static code analysis done, tested, black box tested, should be able to come into my network. Maybe that's a signal for me, right? Or if it's level 2, I think should be okay based on the fact that they have done up all the 38 requirements and it passed, still should be able to come into my network. So I think that will be the role that I felt that CLSMD can play in a post-market situation, right?
We're down to our last 5 minutes. Maybe I ask for each of the panel speakers to do one key point that you would like to land for our audience, both in person as well as those joining us online. What do you think, how can we rally people in the industry to support or participate in the conversations when it comes towards CLSMD? Hai Fan?
Well, I think this is just a kickoff of this program, and we'll see how it goes on. And of course, we have also experience with the COS for IoT devices. And I think in the first stage, probably will be more conversation between the lab and industry with CSA or the labeling scheme owner on how we are going to provide the best service to our customer, or to make sure that it is widely accepted. I'm not sure what will be the best platform to do that, and I think every actors should talk with each other or just brainstorm with each other. Let us know, let the lab know, let CSA know what is the difficulty, and then we can bring this message forward. So there are mechanisms existing in a scheme, we call it a scheme, with certification body or scheme owner and lab and the consumer or developer. And I hope that mechanism can be used to have further discussion on the program. Yeah.
Right. And Prof. Lau?
I think it's a graduated process in which you need to really socialize the idea with the vendors, the users, the patients and doctors to look for this. I think if you don't, then when you introduce it, there's a lot of confusion on the ground. People will misunderstand, and very soon you'll be issuing more amendments and everything else after the fact.
Yes.
So I think if I can kind of take a lesson from how we deployed the Privacy Act, I think there was a lot of consultation. There were continued even after, and there was a runway. Then after the runway, there was even more feedback together. How when it was deployed, what were the challenges, and then there were constant revision after that. To fine tune the aspect of the privacy and helping people understand, so that now, many years later, everybody is very, very worried about, especially in the healthcare setting, so much so they go to the other extreme.
Yes.
I'm going to protect. I'm not going to share. I'm not going to share. So I think there's a process in which you need to do it at the system level, and I think there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from how we have deployed other kind of difficult and thorny new process.
Paul?
Yeah, so I'll just close off. I would say CRSMD is a good initiative where it allows the manufacturer to communicate the cybersecurity posture of the device to the authorities and the HDOs. And at the same time, on the other way, for HDOs and the authorities to convey the cybersecurity requirements to the manufacturers. So it's a two-way communication, which is a good thing. If you look through some of the regional regulators and all that, I will say that in some countries, they look at it in another form. They ask for CE mark. They ask for ISO 27000 certification, especially if you are running a cloud app, right? They ask for ISO 27000, or they say, oh, GDPR compliant. So those are the things that I thought that this is a good initiative because it's simple, it's very transparent, and it's very clear. So, but having said that, I go back to the word balance. We have to look at the whole ecosystem and ensure the vibrancy of the ecosystem. We have to help the startups, right? Because they might not have the resources. And we have to also make it for the manufacturers to be able to get on this scheme seamlessly, right? Yes, there might be some cost involved, but yet it must be easy. And at the same time, be able to grow the whole ecosystem in years to come.
Yeah, I'll do a quick summary of what has been shared. I think essentially we are at the cusp, at the beginning stages of that whole journey. And definitely there needs to be collaboration. Everyone that are interested, have its challenges, please do join us in this journey and be able to help grow this. There will be many revisions and transitions that we have to go through, and that will really help us develop cybersecurity for medical devices together. I'll take this opportunity to thank every one of the panel speakers for this lively discussion, and I think we've addressed most of the pertinent questions that we've had so far.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Mr. Teo as well as our panelists. Please do kindly remain on stage. It is now time for our group photo taking session. So I would like to invite all our gentlemen to kindly stand and to move forward to the front of the stage, please. Thank you very much, gentlemen. You may now return to your seats. So, ladies and gentlemen, with that, we have come to the end of the International IoT Security Roundtable Technical Panel 2022. We hope you've enjoyed today's program. I'd like to thank you for being with us here today, and I hope to see you back here again tomorrow for our leadership dialogue session at 10 a.m., as well as to witness the signing of the Mutual Recognition Agreement on cybersecurity labels in the afternoon. I'll see you tomorrow.